Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the weekly deep dive here for Wayfarers Christian Church. I am Noah Randolph, the teaching pastor here. So thankful that you're tuning in with us again today. It's been kind of a week for all of us here, but it's been for me pretty good. But we're definitely getting into the cold season, so I've got my nice little hat here. That's
you're dressed for the season.
Yeah, dressed for the season and everything. Been walking my dog late at night still, and all the cold and everything. So, yeesh. It was really nippy last night. But how are you doing, Nick?
I'm doing good, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. It has been an interesting few days, but we'll get into that a little bit here. Later.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I think, doing pretty good.
We're in the middle of the Advent season, so we're definitely still hitting all the weeks on that. We're going to be doing the third week this week. Have you got everything planned out for your? Got any ideas what you're doing for your sermon yet? Or
definitely have a good direction for how we're going to be taking it. I kind of mentioned it a little bit in the sermon on Sunday, but since this is my first time sort of officially taking a church through Advent season, I've been figuring it out as I go, I guess, and
as you tend to do.
yeah and so it was funny because I accidentally spent the whole first Sunday of Advent talking about what most churches talk about on the second Sunday of Advent. And so then on the second Sunday of Advent I just spend more time talking about the same thing. And decided I would do my due diligence this time, and I made sure that I had way ahead of time looked up exactly what happens on the third Sunday of Advent. So we've got even a way to connect a little bit about what we're talking about today with that point with what the third Sunday of Advent usually focuses. But
awesome.
Before we get into that, we've been doing our quirky queries.
Yep. I love that name because I came up with it.
Our just kind of get to know you questions, trying to ask each other some interesting questions. We've been getting to know each other a little bit better, and hopefully the people watching have been getting to know us a little bit better too. I think we've both got one picked out this week, so you go first, and then I'll follow up with mine after
that. I feel like I've asked you this at one point, but I've forgotten the answer, so this will be new information for me. What is the best meal you've ever had in your life, hands down?
The best meal I've ever had.
Yeah, the best meal you've ever had. I'm a big cook, so I'm just curious, of all the culinary experiences you've had, what has been the top of the list? You always go back to that memory and say that was the best food I've ever had.
That is a good question. I think the best meal I ever had was here in Memphis, actually.
Really?
Well, it was a very expensive meal.
Memphis has great food, I will say.
Yeah, it was a very expensive meal, so it,
You paid for what it was.
Yeah. I guess I got my money's worth out of it. But it was our, I believe it was our third wedding anniversary, me and my wife, Adrienne. And we went to a restaurant downtown called the Grey Canary. My buddy Jeffrey was working there as a waiter and bartender.
Oh, cool.
So shout out Jeffrey. I know he catches some of these every once in a while. But he was working there at the time, and he had just been telling us, come check it out. He said the food's really great, and you're going to love everything about it. And so we did. It's an expensive restaurant. It's like a fancy, expensive restaurant. So it had to be a special occasion. So we waited for our anniversary, and we got to go. And the cool thing about the restaurant is it's one of those places where you order a lot of small dishes instead of an entree, and they just bring out a whole bunch of different stuff. And me and Adrian just kind of shared everything. It's almost like the tapas thing, some Spanish restaurants will do, but not quite. And so we just kind of went down the list and picked 8 or 9 different things for them to bring us, and they were just kind of slowly bringing them out throughout the night, and we just got to try little bits of all of it. and it was incredible. The highlight of the night, well, they have oysters there. Like it's got like a raw oyster bar,
Ooh.
and you got to pick between like all the different types of oysters, which was pretty good. Adrian did not like that part as much, but I liked that. But the highlight of the night for me was they had a tuna steak, like poke bowl, you know.
Yeah.
So it was like this thick piece of raw tuna steak that they had cubed and like dissolved in like a pineapple reduction sauce thing. And so it had like infused into the tuna steak so that when you like took a bite, it just literally melted in your mouth. Like you didn't have to chew it at all. It literally just like dissolved onto your tongue. And every other aspect of the meal was incredible. The Jeffrey made us some like really awesome cocktails. The
nice.
The service and experience was awesome. Every single dish was incredible, and it was just like start to finish.
Best meal you've ever
Best
had.
meal I've ever had.
That's awesome.
Also,
That's awesome.
maybe possibly the most expensive meal I've ever paid for. So I don't know what that says, but either way, that was good. What about you?
I was thinking about it, and I was like, I don't think I've ever paid more than $20 for a meal outside of the house, just because.
I'm gonna fix this camera. Hold
Oh
on.
yeah, fix it. Yeah. I've never really like. I've never been that guy that like. I feel like that's only a part of your life that you do when you're like married or like engaged or something like that. You know, you'd go out to a really expensive place. It's really weird if you're single and you like go to a really fancy place like that. You know, like what am I going to do? Like I'm a single guy. Like I'm going to walk into a really nice fancy place where everybody's like dressed in suits and stuff like that. Sit down at a lone table and enjoy it. It's just kind of weird.
That's a good point.
It's just like really, I don't really, I've not been able to come to terms with that one. So I don't do a lot of those fancy like meals and things, and so I would say honestly probably some of the best meals I've had have been what I've cooked at my home for myself, you know.
All right.
I would probably say up to this point probably the best meal I've ever had was Peyton came over and we made homemade lasagna from start to finish.
You've told me about this meal.
Start to finish, yeah. And we used red wine to like deglaze the bottom of a pan that we had cooked pork and steak in. So we got that nice fond, and then added tomato paste and added onions and celery and garlic, and cooked all the veggies in the fond and the liquid, and then it added all the meat back into it, and then just cooked that down for like an hour and a half. And it ended up being this like super rich, creamy meat. It's just like melting in your mouth. Really amazing. Like you didn't even want to put that in the lasagna. It was so good by itself. You just wanted to eat that all the time. And so that's kind of what we did. We snacked on it as we're making this lasagna. And he made homemade lasagna noodles, and then we made a bechamel instead of ricotta cheese. We did a bechamel, which is just a white thick sauce. It's what you use to make mac and cheese. And we used the bechamel as sort of like the ricotta bit, which is like more traditional Italian way to make lasagna. And so we used that and then the homemade noodles, and we just did layer upon layer of Parmesan, bechamel, meat sauce, noodles, Parmesan, all the different layers. And we did like 3 layers of it, baked that in the oven. Oh my goodness. Like still to this day, I think I've never had a better meal than that lasagna.
That sounds awesome.
That lasagna was incredible. So
we probably
take
should have
5
eaten
hours.
before we started talking about all of this.
I'm sorry.
We just ate some cookies that Betsy
Shout out to Betsy. Those were
made for
great
us.
cookies.
Yes, those were incredible. Thank you, Betsy. They did not even last a day. We destroyed those, but they were really, really good. I don't think that was enough of an appetizer before talking about all of this. But all right, here's my question. Get to know you question. Quirky query. What is your favorite object that you've ever purchased?
Mm-hmm.
And what is your favorite object that you were ever given as a gift? So, basically, like, what's your favorite thing?
I've told you one. I've told you the second question before.
All right, what was that one?
So I'll do that one first. What's my favorite gift I've ever been given? So I'm a big Hemingway fan, Ernest Hemingway fan. and I did not know a lot about his backstory when I was a big fan of his. Like, I read all of his books, and I didn't really know his history and, like, his life and everything. I found out all of that later after basically finishing all of his books, and learned that he was not necessarily the greatest, like, male figure. He was a very macho and succinctly like left a wife for a prettier wife kind of lifestyle, and it just wasn't a great person. And so I didn't know any of this, and kind of was just like talking about Hemingway all the time at Avenue and things like that. And ended up for our Secret Santa at Avenue one year, I ended up getting gifted basically a picture of Hemingway that has Greek letters underneath it. It's like an entire like Greek script underneath a pencil etched picture of Hemingway with one of his most famous quotes, which is writing is easy. All you have to do is sit at a typewriter and bleed, which is a great quote. Yeah. But I got all of this, and it was really cool and everything. And it was gifted to me by like someone that I would call an ultra feminist. Mm-hmm. And I never knew in the moment that I like Hemingway's backstory, and I never knew how much she actually like went against that grain, I guess, in her to give me that gift. And that's always meant like the most to me, that she would give me one of my favorite authors who I didn't even know was this kind of leaning more towards this sexist kind of mentality. And so that gift has always meant more to me than any other gift given to me, just because.
Especially because you knew the giver.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be that one. And then what was the first question again? Sorry.
Your favorite like thing that you've ever purchased?
Favorite thing that I've ever purchased.
Like you bought yourself.
I would probably say, that's tough. This is going to sound bad, but I've purchased a lot of things, and so it's like you're trying to figure out like, you purchase video games and you purchase like all these different items, but that's really tough. Sometimes I rate things based off of how much I use them.
Sure.
Not really like the experience of purchasing them themselves, like, because sometimes I'll purchase a thing and then it never gets used.
Right.
And then I kind of feel like,
yeah, sure.
Like, oh, wow, that was a bad purchase. So I think I'm just going to go with the thing that I use more than any other thing in my house that I've bought, because that just makes the most sense to me. And that would be, I have this little coffee setup and everything that I have. And the thing that I probably use the most out of that setup is a little hot water heater that basically heats all the way up to 208 degrees on its own and keeps it at temperature. Without me ever like having to worry about it. Basically, all I have to do is fill it up, and then it just heats itself. And that honestly is probably the thing I use more than anything, because I use it for like all my baking. Like I need hot water. I can just go right to the tap. I know it sounds super lame to say that,
this is
but
great.
like it's literally just like a thing that I always am using. And it was $50, which for something like that normally they're like $100. And so like, it was just way cheaper than I expected it to be, and it's probably
and it works great.
And it's worked great. I've had it for like 3-4 years, and it just gives me hot water on demand.
I love that
without any need to wait. And I think that probably is the best gift I've ever purchased for myself. So what about you? That's
really similar to mine. I'm like an ultra efficiency focused Enneagram 3.
Yeah.
So
I think my 3 wings coming out on this one.
Yeah. So. So it's easy for me to think, because my favorite thing I've purchased is similar.
Okay.
It's actually that camera that's recording us right now.
Hi.
It's like my favorite. I've owned a lot of cameras.
Uh-huh.
I've bought and sold a lot of them, and tried a lot of different ones. And this one's my favorite because of a lot of reasons. I love the image I get out of it. I love the ergonomics. I love the size. I love how it's used. But one of the things I really like about it, I don't even know if I told you this, my favorite YouTuber and I emulate a lot of my style after him, is a guy named Caleb Pike.
Okay.
He has a YouTube camera education channel called DSLR Video Shooter. And it's this awesome, huge video channel. And I actually purchased that camera from him.
Oh, wow.
He had tweeted that he was selling some gear off, and he was selling it for like a really, really good price. So I purchased it from him. So I love that because it has this connection to like one of my favorite content creators.
That's
I
awesome.
Be like, that camera used to belong to Caleb Pike. So for all of those reasons, I love it. But it's the same thing. It's as far as like something that I use day in and day out that I bought.
You literally do use that Sigma
Yeah.
every day here.
Yeah. Yeah. I use it all the time. So it's my favorite for all of those reasons. My favorite gift that I've been given is a tougher one. I'm going to cheat and have two answers, I think.
Okay.
One is, you can't see it on camera here, but there's a black guitar hanging over here in the corner. My grandfather gave me that guitar, and he gave it to me just a few months before passing away. But it's also one of those things that has led me into a whole life of music, and, music's been so important to me and such a big thing that I focused on. And so I love that for that reason, but also just kind of the connection that it has with my grandfather. My second one is similar to
mine.
Yours, or I was just thinking about it, and it is up on this shelf. It's crazy. All my favorite things are in this room right now. You can kind of see it. It's all blurry, but it's this white book that's facing forward with
if you are
gold
sufficient for the
Yeah.
task, it is too small.
Yep.
Right?
It's like a journal that for a while I was the spiritual formation coordinator for Mid-South Christian College, the college that we're broadcasting from right now. And I ran the chapel services and did some counseling, and I was the spiritual guy, the pastor for the people training to be pastors. And it was about the end of my year of doing that where I was going to move on to start this church plant. And I was doing one of my last devotionals with all the students from the school. And we finished up the devotional, and I'm packing up to leave. And they're like, "Hey, Nick, before you leave, we have this surprise for you." And at that moment, my wife, Adrienne, and my brother, Jeremy, and Kendall, his wife, all pop in the room, and they have like a cake and ice cream. And they were like, "We're going to do like a going away party for you," which was awesome. It was great. But then at the end of the party, they handed me this book, and it was just a book it's a journal that has a John Piper quote on it, because John Piper is one of my favorite pastors, and just really resonated with where I was feeling at that moment in time with this huge task of trying to start a church.
Yeah.
And the quote says, "If you are sufficient for the task, then the task is too small." And is just basically resonating with that fact of like, don't worry about feeling overwhelmed. But then also related to that, inside they each went in and wrote something that I had done for them that year that they appreciated.
Aww.
And like something that they had, and like kind words from people really mean a lot to me.
Yeah.
I'm like a words of affirmation kind of guy. And so anytime I'm feeling down or feeling like I'm not doing enough, I can just like look at that book, and it's literally a book of words of affirmation from some people who mean a lot to me. And so that's really helpful too, because it just kind of helps get me through the hard times.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Those are probably my favorites. Not as useful, but very meaningful.
Oh.
So, yeah. So, speaking of hard times,
yeah.
I kind of hinted at it briefly. I'm not going to go into all the details. It'll be for another time, and it's still a developing situation. But I've had a hard 24 hours-ish. I told you a little bit about it earlier, Noah, but my family has been dealing with some health issues, and I was not dealing with it well. I was not dealing with having to deal with other people going through health issues very well. And so we spent a lot of time talking about it earlier today. And so we kind of pivoted. Originally, we were going to spend a little bit of time today talking about like Christian movies.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a goofier concept, but just like,
Christian
why,
art and things.
why especially so many people our age hate so many Christian movies. I referenced the movie God's Not Dead in the sermon on Sunday.
Mm-hmm. It was so funny
And-
how many people our age were like, "Oh, I'm so glad you said
Yeah,
that."
they were like, "Oh, I also hate that movie." But then, like, I know other people that were just like, "No, I love that movie. What's your problem?" So it's a very divisive one for that reason. But it felt a little too goofy to talk about. I just didn't think I could get in that headspace
Yeah.
in the moment right now necessarily. And we felt like our conversation that we had earlier was just really good, and maybe something that would be helpful to y'all, and
Yeah.
something that connects closely with the themes and topics of Advent that we've been going through specifically. And most specifically, what we want to talk about is just the problems of pain, the issues related with pain, and is it possible for you to actually grow and mature, especially as Christians? You know, that's the big topic that we're talking about with all our deep dives. Especially as Christians, is it possible for us to grow and to mature without experiencing pain in our lives? And it's interesting because this is kind of an ongoing conversation that the two of us have been having for months at this point.
Yeah, it really has.
And it's kind of funny. We've both bonded over the fact that we're both wimps when it comes to
I've never thought about
pain.
it that way, but thanks, Nick.
just call it like I see it, man. We both just really are afraid of experiencing pain. We both do a lot of things in our lives to avoid pain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not exclusive to us. I think it's kind of a human condition. There's not a lot of other human beings that go through pain, but you've helped me at least notice that there is definitely a courage component that comes with looking at pain that may be on the horizon and then diving into it anyways,
Yeah.
so to speak. And it takes courage to willfully experience that kind of pain in life sometimes. And so it's really funny because that's something we both aspire to, but I don't know that either of us feel like we've been very good at doing it, at not just trying to escape from our pain in everyday life and in just our own experiences.
Well, and I was thinking about this in terms of like our society right now, is that the more and more we advance technologically, the more and more we're trying to prevent things from being painful, you know?
Mhm.
Like if you think about it in terms of like our farming, for instance, right? Like we've tried to like, that used to be our source for food, and farming was really difficult. Like it was a very sweat of your brow, like very like hard thing to do. And the more and more technology has advanced, the more and more we've pushed that off on a certain subset of group of people that still farm, while the rest of us don't have to do that anymore, right? And it's like every technological advance is attempting to, in some ways, lessen the amount of physical pain that we endure. You know, like we as a society, we're trying to move further and further away from experiencing pain in our normal everyday lives. And so, you know, you and I today are the result of 2,000 years and even more of technological development away from the livelihood in which pain was just a normal reality. Like, I mean, I was thinking about the fact that, like, you know, chloroform and these ways of like anesthesia and things are just recent inventions. You know, like they're not something that like they're not something our world has had for a very long time. And so I don't know. I've found that now that we're at the point where technology has gotten so good at preventing pain, even sometimes before we can even like predict when it's going to happen. Now we have these questions that start to arise, is like, now that we are able to prevent it, like, is there a benefit to it? And is there actually something good that pain does in our lives that shouldn't be prevented, or should, you know? And like that, I think that's really the main question that we're going to kind of tackle today is, now that we can prevent certain pains from happening, you know, what is it specific? Is pain a bad thing? Is it a good thing? Like, what exactly what are we dealing with here when we talk about it? Because, like, I think right now we're at the point, at least in our culture and society, where everybody I've talked to at least wants to avoid pain at every moment, you and I in particular, where we really, any time you like sort of broach the subject of pain, there's this immediate like aversion to it, right? And this feeling that like this is just going to end really badly. And you can look at a lot of the pain in the world and you can see how it leads to not good places. But there have been several people in my life, not people, but like books I've read in my life that seem against that. And they all seem to be from a Christian perspective, like a lot of Christians have sort of spoken into our modern society and said, pain actually can help you.
And so before we get into that though, so, so it's kind of like the question we're asking ourselves is, now that we can avoid pain so easily, should that be the goal, to just avoid all pain?
Right.
Or is there something good that can come from painful experiences or experiencing pain and just all kinds of different things related to pain? And what really got us started talking about it earlier today was that just like our society is in a place where we just don't have to experience as much pain as we used to have to, we as individuals often are in that same place where we just are living really privileged lives where we've not had to go through a lot of painful experiences like people in past generations and cultures would have had to. And you were talking about a conversation that you had with some friends of yours where a few of them were arguing for specifically this point, that those people who have not had to go through a lot of pain in their life, who have tried to avoid it at all costs, are like less knowledgeable of what's actually going on in the world. Yeah. And like are less able to actually see things as they are. Yeah. I compared it a little bit to my own experiences with what I've referenced in my various sermons, which is just that most of my life I've been a pretty good just rule follower. Just followed the rules, done whatever I need to do, obeyed my parents, obeyed the law, just kind of been a general rule follower. And because of that, I've noticed that there's been just lots of times in life where people will just dismiss the things I'm saying because they're like, Nick's just goody two shoes guy. He's not gonna. He can't really speak into this situation. And it's a similar thing that was being referenced when it comes to pain, that there's just certain people that feel like you don't really know what's going on unless you are somebody that has experienced pain in some way or another. Yeah. And so that's kind of one of the first questions. Positives of pain, I guess, could be this possibility, this thing that was brought up by your friends, which is
the pain
opens your eyes to how the world really is, helps you see things as they are in some form or another.
Do you think that's like because of the experience, right? Like it's like the sense in which like because you experience something really painful, you're open to the fact that the world is so broken? Is that really where it comes from, I think?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few different reasons, but I guess, do you agree with that? Do you think that pain does help you see the world better?
Yeah, I think I have to. I think in some sense you always have this bit of, I don't know. It seems as if it deepens you in some sense, right? Especially, I think we were talking about it earlier, where I don't necessarily think it's the pain itself that deepens you, but it does force you to ask a question, and it will always force you to ask this question, which is what is keeping me going, right? Like in the middle of this pain, what is keeping me going? And when you are forced to ask that question, what is keeping me going? However you answer that question is really going to deepen your understanding of a bigger question, which is, why do I live? Right? And I think that's really a big part of maturity, is getting to the point where you're asking, why am I here? Why am I doing what I'm doing? You know? And so when your pain just has a really forceful way of making you ask that question, what is going to get me through this? You know?
So what's like an example of that? Like just as far as making it a little bit more concrete.
Yeah.
How can metaphorically some pain that somebody's experiencing help them answer that question?
You see this a lot in like any story, really. Is oftentimes we call this the hero's journey, where your character in a story will go through something really traumatic before they make a good decision that affects the whole story. I'll use Star Wars as an example, right? Luke Skywalker doesn't want to leave his little home in Tatooine, even though everybody says, no, you totally should. You should be a Jedi. And Ben Kenobi wants him to be a Jedi, but, you know, he wants to stay home and work on power converters, you know? Like he's too afraid to take that step to go out into the space, and even though that's really what he wants to do. And so what it takes for him to do that is it takes the death of his uncle and his aunt being killed by stormtroopers before he ever actually takes to the sky, right? That's like the linchpin that like pushes him into going into the sky, and then eventually becomes the hero. And you know how the story goes, right? And so it's kind of ingrained in our stories that you need that push, you need that traumatic event to push you into the skies. And it kind of like in the same way, my friends that were talking about it used an argument that I thought was actually pretty good, where they talked about how when you're building your muscles physically, you've got to kill the muscles that are there before you build them back up, essentially, you know? You've got to, in essence, go through the pain of having deteriorated muscles before you build them back up as even stronger than they were before.
Which is kind of where we got the title for today's episode.
Yeah, no pain, no gain.
No pain, no gain. That's that phrase gets used all the time as like in bodybuilding and working out. You need the pain of having to push through to build up your muscles and all that kind of stuff. So it leads to maturity.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, we do think that is biblical. I personally see that the way Jesus starts the Sermon on the Mount, you know, his big sermon where he's going to lay out the law of Christ, you know, so to speak, and he starts it with this section called the Beatitudes, which is just these blessings for specific people. And, you know, there's famous ones. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Everyone that he is focusing on and the specific types of people he's focusing on are like these people who have experienced suffering and pain and heartache in their lives. And it does seem that Jesus is implying that because they have gone through those difficulties, they are blessed because they see the world as it really is. They don't have the wool pulled over their eyes in the way that the wealthy and privileged do sometimes.
Yeah.
And he does specifically in the sermon talk about the wealthy and how there's even other points in the Gospels where he talks about people who are wealthy. It's going to be very hard for them to enter the kingdom of heaven. And I think at least a component of that is just that they haven't had to go through very much pain.
Right.
So they're not going to be very mature. You know, they just have not had to experience that level of heartache in their life and have not had to grow because of it in some ways. So anecdotally and in stories and all that kind of stuff, we do think that's true. We've both seen that. But we don't necessarily, and we do see it biblical as well, you know, like I'm saying, we think there's a component of that in the Bible also. But the area where both of us were struggling a little bit earlier today when we were talking about it, where we're still maybe kind of questioning it a little bit, was on whether that pain can be helpful in maturing you, but is it necessary? and will it always be there, so to
Right.
speak?
Right. Because the way I was having the discussion, a part of me has always felt that not only will pain grow you, but love will too, you know? And part of me wants to believe, like, for instance, let's take the Star Wars example again, right? Part of me wants to believe that had Ben Kenobi been a very loving person in that situation, and his parents had been very supportive of Luke's desire, or I guess not his parents, but his uncle and aunt had been very supportive of his desires to want to go off and fight in the rebellion, that if they had loved him into that, he would have also made that same choice, and he didn't necessarily need his uncle and his aunt to die for him to go off, right? Like,
Right.
And there's that part of me that always believes that you don't necessarily need the push towards growth. The push towards growth doesn't always have to be pain. The push towards growth can be love itself. And I've had many times in my life where I've had very painful things that have always kept me down, and I've always made the wrong choices. Granted, in those moments, like, I've made choices to continue on and suffer and not necessarily grow. So in situations like that, I'm more likely to stay on Tatooine for the rest of my life and just pity myself and be like, oh, I lost my aunt and my uncle, and man, that's just awful. And, I'm just going to live out the rest of my life as a farmer here on Tatooine. Like, that's that's my personality. My tendency is to not be the hero, and my tendency is to instead stay there. And I've made bad choices in my life doing that. And so I feel like the only answer for me for when I make choices like that, where I'm like, no, I'm just going to stay on Tatooine, is someone has to come in and love me out of Tatooine. Like, someone has to come in and, instead of giving me more pain that pushes me, which isn't going to work, it's just going to keep me there on Tatooine, someone needs to come in and love me out of it,
Absolutely.
And so I feel like that's the missing component when a lot of times Christians do talk about pain as a good push. It's not the only way to push you towards something.
Right. Because there are some people that can experience pain in their life, and rather than having it push them towards better things, it leads them into just sort of to giving up.
Exactly.
And so it can kind of go both ways. And to kind of push back on the earlier point, which is that pain helps you see the world better, I think part of the reason people feel that way is because the world is broken, it is fallen, it isn't working the way it's supposed to in some ways, and so good people don't get to flourish, bad people get away with things all the time. And so if you're somebody who has never had to go through any sort of painful experience, you haven't experienced that brokenness firsthand. Whereas a person who's gone through a lot of pain, they know it because they've experienced it. They're like, I know this world is messed up because I've seen it for myself. So in that way, you feel like you see better. But my whole pushback is that I have also noticed that in that same way that pain can push you and it can also set you back, I've also noticed that pain can open your eyes, but it can also close them again.
Yeah.
It can also blind you in a way to the realities of how things really are. The example I use all the time is a story I heard once of some missionaries who were friends of friends, and they had adopted their son from this from Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is a country that has been experiencing a lot of starvation and famine for decades at this point. And their son was very, emaciated, undernourished, all this kind of stuff when they got him back to the States, to their home. And they slowly started, just integrating him into their family and, helping him get to know things and get to know the country and all this kind of stuff. And the mom tells the story of one day when she was cleaning up in his room, and she moved the bed off to the side, and under his bed she found just piles of food. Just piles of food. And it was like moldy and rotten because a lot of it had just kind of like sat in there, not in a refrigerator, just.
Yeah.
And what she found out was that her son was eating half of his meals and then saving the other half so that he could hoard it in his room. Because he had grown up with so much pain and starvation in his life where he didn't know where his next meal was coming from, that he felt like he needed to save it. Save half. He wasn't sure where his next meal was going to come from. And she described how it took years, basically, for her son to finally learn that there was enough food. He was not going to starve. Their friends, their family, their church was going to make sure that they didn't starve. There was plenty available for him here in the States, and he was not going to starve. He didn't. It took a long time for that reality to set in.
Mm.
And so in a lot of ways, the pain that he had experienced had basically made it almost impossible for him to see the depths of the blessings that he did have and the depths of the ways that he was provided for here and now in this space. And so I've seen that with a lot of people I know who have gone through a lot of pain in their life, is that they sometimes have gone through so much pain that they're just unwilling or unable to see the good when it is there. That there is enough food, that person does really love you, that you are really well provided for, that you have a great community, all kinds of truths that they end up not being able to see because they have just gone through.
Pain blinds them to the lights of the world that do exist in their life.
Yes.
Yeah.
So even though, yes, the world is fallen, yes, there are a lot of negative and horrible things in the world, but there's also a lot of great things in the world. There's also a lot of love and joy and just like beautiful things.
Yeah.
And the pain that they have experienced has blinded them to some of those things. So it can help you see better, but it can also blind you.
Yeah.
And so it's not the end all be all, there's kind of pitfalls on either side of it.
Yeah.
In my own experience.
Yeah, and I think that is the unfortunate cycle of blinded by pain, is that when you get to that point, suddenly, even when people do try and love you, you don't see it as love, because you're blinded, right? You're blinded by all the pain of your past, right? That was a big step in my life, was having to realize that I was letting past pains influence how modern and present people were loving me, and I had to learn that I had to resolve those past pains and deal with those past pains so that I then could accept the love of people in the present without that blindness, And I think that part of it is a danger that pain has, just as much as pain can push you to grow and push you to mature. It can also, if you are making these choices where you just sit in that pain and you let that pain define you, it can also blind you, like you're saying. And so there's a warning kind of there, I think, where you've got to be really careful how you manage it. I was telling you this story that I think really fits well here. I don't know if many of you know, but there's a author named Frederick Buechner who's kind of been on like the outsets of Christianity. He's like somewhere, like he's definitely someone that I think we're rediscovering lately. But for a while, he was just sort of known only in like literary circles. I hadn't ever heard of him until around 21 or 22. But Frederick Buechner has a really interesting like life story. His father committed suicide when he was very young. His mother was suffered from dementia from later on in her life, and he had to deal with a lot of pain in his life. And he wrote very beautifully. He is just one of the most gifted writers I've ever read. And he wrote of a story that he had later on in his life when he ended up going to a retreat where they essentially sat around and talked about the pains in their past and their life. And he told the story of his father committing suicide and just a lot of the different things that he went through as a kid. And he said after the retreat was kind of finishing up their session, the main kind of organizer kind of took him aside and talked to him about it. And he said he heard from this guy a line that he just kind of ran with ever since, which was the leader told him, "You've had a lot of pain in your life and you've been a good steward of it." And he said that line of being a good steward of your pain just sort of focused his idea of pain.
Mm-hmm.
And he stopped thinking of it as something that was happening to him
Mm-hmm.
and something that was actually happening for him. And it was one of those moments where he started to see all of the pains that had happened in his life as something that he could use to help other people with as well. And that's kind of where he started writing his own books, delving into his pains, his past pains. He wrote several memoirs. And he said that as he grew older, he watched his mother, who was dealing also with the fact that her husband had committed suicide,
Mm-hmm.
and how she handled her pain. And she had never really acknowledged it. She ignored it and she buried it, and she didn't really ever think about it. She tried to put it in the past and let the past be the past.
Yeah.
And he watched as that slowly began to deteriorate her mind, really. Something about putting it in the back of your head and never acknowledging it and ignoring it slowly started to warp her.
Yeah.
And he saw that was a very unhealthy way to manage that pain. And so that's always stuck with me too, has been that you can't really ignore it either, you know?
Yeah, and I love that line Buechner uses where he juxtaposes bearing pain, right, is what we call it. What was the two phrases he uses?
He's like steward of a pain, or stewarding your pain.
Stewarding your pain versus bearing your pain.
Yeah.
I think is what he talks about.
Yeah, grasping a hold of it with a closed fist versus an open hand.
Right. And so somebody can like just kind of hold it.
Yeah.
And they don't do anything with it. They hold it in.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas somebody else will steward it for other things. It's Mimi posted, she commented just now, Donna Nivens, Adrian's grandmother, she posted, question I ask it all the time is, what am I to learn from this, Lord, in order to serve you better? And I think she's kind of hitting on exactly what you were saying there too. What how can we steward this pain so that something can come from it, rather than just like bearing it and squirreling it away and putting it back somewhere in a dark recess of our minds.
Yeah, Buechner almost thought of it as pain being one of the talents that were given in the parable of the 10 talents, right? You know, you got you got a man that's given 5 talents, you've got a man that's given 2, and you've got one that's given 1. And Buechner went so far as to think that pain was actually a talent that you're given, and you can either invest that pain, you know, or you can bury it, right?
Yeah.
And he said that he watched his own mother bury it, and he saw the results of that, right? And so what he tried to do is he tried to invest that pain and try and get something back from it. And I always felt like that was probably the most powerfully, really convicting for me, because I think really all of us want to bottle it up, you know, like that's our natural tendency, is to bottle it up. But he really deeply felt that if you don't do that, if you do bury it, then you also won't receive love, which is really what we were talking about earlier, is you become so blinded by the fact that you've buried this thing in the dirt that you can't really see people loving you, knowing that pain exists, you know? And then you start asking questions like, well, if they did find out about this pain that's in my life that I've buried, would they love me then?
Right.
You know, like, because you've buried it, because no one knows about it, then you start asking these questions, and you don't really know because you haven't actually unburied the thing and given it to someone else, you know?
Right.
And so it's like it becomes a spiral in which you make all these wrong choices, I think. And it's not really that pain is the thing that's the wrong thing. This is what Lewis will say in The Problem of Pain. He doesn't actually think that pain itself is bad, but he thinks that the choices that we make as a result of that pain are what is bad, you know?
Mm-hmm. Or what can be bad.
Or what can be bad, yeah. And it's like, you know, it's and you've talked even about this too, is like when it's the intentions behind the thing that's really the harmful thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're intending harm on someone, right? When you're intending this evil, you've already done an evil through intention more so than the actual act itself is. And I think that that's really what he gets across a lot of the time with pain, is that most of the times the wrongs that really hurt the most are not the act itself, but the intention behind that act, you know?
Right.
And that's really, to me, that's the thing that you are forced to reconcile, right? You know, and you're forced to deal with. And yeah, I haven't gotten that one fully fleshed out yet.
Right.
But that's kind of,
And so it's kind of like the thing that makes a thing moral or immoral, good or bad, all of those kinds of things is the human choices that are involved in that. So Lewis makes a really big point of whatever pain you've experienced in your life, what ends up defining its goodness or badness is what choices you make,
right,
in spite of it or because of it or in the midst of it. Whereas the pain itself is really just kind of the catalyst for getting you into that place where you have suddenly a decision to make at that moment. And just in general, that idea is something that is really helpful because sometimes I think we get so discouraged by having to go through pain. Partly because, bring it all the way back to the beginning, we just haven't had a lot of practice with it ourselves. You said something really helpful to me today where you were just saying your own experience has been that lots of times you are imagining how bad something's going to be, how painful something's going to be, and it's never as bad as what you're imagining. And so I think part of that is just this disconnect we have because we don't experience a lot of pain in our lives, so we make it out to be a much bigger, worse thing than it ends up being oftentimes. Yeah,
you can oftentimes imagine what the future will hold as far as the subject goes. You know, you can say, okay, I felt pain because this has happened in the past, and this is probably going to happen again. And then you can start to make these predictions about like the pains you're going to experience tomorrow and the day after that. And oftentimes you aggravate those, right? And you end up having this sense of fear, and you end up, I sometimes think, making decisions that even cause you more pain because you're so afraid of the pain.
Avoiding pain.
Yeah. I think like you actually end up aggravating the pain you do fear. I'll use the example of when I was a kid. My sister and I would always go to the doctor, and we always knew we would both get our finger pricked. And when we get our finger pricked, there was two ways. You could do it my sister's way or you could do it my way. My sister would clench up the entire time because she was so afraid of getting her finger pricked. And I would go in with a Game Boy, and I'd play my little video game and just hold my finger out and just ignore it. And my sister would always experience more pain when she did get her finger pricked because she was tensed up, right? And you're just like, when you're that tight, it's going to actually cause more pain. Whereas mine, sometimes I didn't even know they had pricked my finger because I'm so focused on a video game. And I've found that the mental attitude that you have towards the very subject itself of pain will determine how much pain you do experience.
Yep.
You know?
And that's kind of what we wanted to culminate with ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
I like that example. You've given me that example before.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that partly because your sister focused on the pain,
Mm-hmm.
and because of that felt more pain.
Yeah.
You focused on something that brought you joy, and because of that you felt less pain. You focused
Yeah.
on this game, this thing
Mm-hmm.
that you were... And that's kind of the biblical model that I'm starting to find over and over again for how to deal with pain. It's the model that the Apostle Paul uses to describe Jesus, and says that Jesus knew that the cross was going to be painful, but for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, is what it says. He looked past the pain on the other side, looked towards this amazing, joyful kingdom that he was bringing into existence. He looked at people like me and you that he was going to be able to bring into his family, and that helped him get through the pain. It's an example I've heard lots of times from women who describe childbirth as, it's widely recognized as one of the most painful things that humans can experience, but they push through it because of the joy of the child on the other side of that sort of pain. And so focusing on something joyful or something good or something positive is the way that you kind of get through a lot of that pain. An example from the New Testament that I see a lot of times when it relates to pain is it's very early in the book of Acts. The disciples, the 12 disciples of Jesus, a few of them are out now as apostles proclaiming the good news of Jesus, and some of the Jewish leaders don't want that, and so they're trying to get them to stop preaching about Jesus, stop talking about Jesus. And so they have them whipped and they have them flogged. And the book of Acts describes this crazy situation where they leave rejoicing. They leave joyful and happy that they had to go through that pain.
Yeah.
And the reason they do is it says so in the text. It's that they were counted worthy to suffer for the cause of Christ. That they viewed that pain as God giving them a stamp of approval of like, you are worthy of suffering for this great cause, which is the kingdom. They were looking at that kingdom, looking at that promised reward, and it was what was the motivation to help them to push through. The Apostle Paul uses that language. He describes it as like a race, and there's a prize that's set before you. You focus on that prize, and it helps you push through the pain.
Yeah.
And to me, that is kind of the key in a lot of things. You focus on this this joy, on this positive thing that's on the other side of a lot of it. And so that's what I'm going to focus on this upcoming Sunday in our sermon, is sort of how do you rejoice in the midst of suffering, in the midst of difficult times. And it's interesting because the third Sunday of Advent is usually used as kind of a reprieve from some of the deep, dark, difficult concepts that usually we talk about in Advent. The reason we thought this was appropriate is because Advent is a time when you focus on pain and suffering and some of the deep darknesses that exist in the world. But, we know that people aren't able to just live in that deep, dark place all the time. You need to come up for air for a second.
Yeah.
And this third Sunday is where we focus on the joy of the coming Messiah. But I really wanted to focus on the sort of paradoxical way of like, how do you experience joy in the middle of all the suffering? And I think part of it is that forward-looking thing. But I won't go into all of that. If you want to hear the actual final part of it, you'll have to tune in this Sunday, 7 o'clock, here on Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're watching. We'll be on TikTok again Sunday. We're very thankful. Jacob Dooley, our outreach minister, has been out with COVID. He has been quarantined and had tested positive a few weeks ago, and he's been cleared to return to his normal activities, and so he'll be able to help us out with other things there. So we're thankful for that. But yeah, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, wherever it is that you're tuning in, you'll be able to catch us this Sunday. You can hear a little bit more about that specific topic. How do you rejoice in the middle of your pain? You got anything else?
Yeah, I would just say that like it's not easy going through, so don't think of this as like, here's how you should think in the middle of you suffering.
Right.
Like a lot of times, like when you're suffering in the middle of it, you just need to be. I was telling you this earlier. Just think about it as trying to get through this day.
Right.
Think about what you can do in this day. Pray to God. I pray to God all the time when I'm suffering through pains. I find that prayer really helps the most when it comes to pain, because the psalmists in particular gave us an example of how to handle pain, which was not to bottle it up and not to dish it out onto every human that's in front of you. Instead, what you do is you pray it to God. And the Psalms are huge examples of taking your pain and praying it straight to God. So I'm really a big fan of that. I think that helps a lot. And so this is more global, macro, how to think about pain overall once you've already gone through it and experienced it. But in the moment, the only thing I'd say to you is just take that.
Don't bottle it up.
Don't bottle it up, and just take that pain and pray it to God.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I think that's great. I definitely wholeheartedly agree with that as well. So that's good advice. We'll leave it on that. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We will see y'all hopefully this Sunday and next week for our following deep dive.
Thanks, guys. Oh, fade to black.